This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals, in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. Today, my guest is Jeff Campbell, CEO, founder of Incentli. And Jeff spent 18 years as a high school physics teacher, which got him interested in e-learning engagement tools and strategies. His work has since branched out to the event space, where he uses gamification and motivational design strategies to help event stakeholders get more value from their experiences. I recently heard Jeff speaking on another podcast, and Jeff shared his thoughts about motivational design, and of course, I wanted to talk with him. We met and found that not only we live in the same time zone, which is a cool thing these days, by the way, but more importantly, we both are interested in psychological aspects of things in business, in events in particular, and have similar views on motivational design, gamification, and learning in events. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about those topics with you.
Well, thank you very much for the very kind intro. It was amazing, by the way. I'm really excited to be here and chat all things motivational design and events and improving business results for event professionals. So yeah, really excited to be here today.
Thank you. Right. When, like I said, when we first connected, you mentioned that you previously worked in the e-learning industry. And my first question would be just about this. Can you tell more about your journey and also specifically some e-learning takeaways?
For sure. Yeah, in your intro, you introduced me as my previous experience has been in a classroom, and I taught high school physics for 18 years. And when I was teaching, I got interested in using what's called a blended environment. And so I would see my students face to face, but require them to go on to an e-learning platform to improve their theory and understanding, so we could maximize the face-to-face time. And I got disappointed with the lack of engagement and progress my students were making on the e-learning side and having a direct impact on my face-to-face time. So I started to get really interested in online learner motivation and engagement tools that we could introduce into the e-learning platform to obviously facilitate the content consumption that I was really after. And that led me to look at what the existing options were, and I wasn't very happy with the behavior change that I was hoping for, but wasn't getting. And so that led me to get interested in gamification and looking at tying in game strategies, game mechanics into the learning environment. And so I started a company and started working with some game studios out of Vancouver, and we started exploring ways that we could tap into that. And originally my thought was we would start with the K-12 learning environment, because that was my background. But pretty soon after we started to publish our plugins and have our platform available, we were approached by the corporate space, who said, hey, can you do something for us in the corporate learning world? And at that point, I had no idea what corporate learning was and how things worked there. So of course, my answer was yes, of course, we'll look at this. And originally, I thought about getting involved in employee and internal training, and we still work with projects in that space, but it kind of moved and morphed over to the customer education or extended enterprise training, and that's where training programs that are looking to train non-employees, so contractors, wholesalers, distributors, franchisees, people that are not required to do any training, but these people play an incredibly important role in the success of a company through the purchase or recommendation of their products and services. And so it's still a big part of what we do is work on the extended enterprise training. And during COVID, we were, again, working on with a number of different e-learning or LMS solutions, learning management systems. And some of these LMSs run their own events. And so during COVID, they were running events virtually, and they came to us and said, hey, can we use your tool to drive engagement at our events? And of course, at that time, I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, I was thinking getting our platform in front of an audience that was using it in e-learning. And then we saw the crazy uptake and the engagement from the event perspective. So in the last 18 months or so, we've opened up an offering in the event space just based on the success we saw. So I'm learning lots about the event space over the last 18 months. So hopefully that's kind of it gives you a bit of a path on how we got to where we are today.
Absolutely. So what are the takeaways, like initial takeaways that you can share from the e-learning industry and from your experience in that industry and how it can be applied in events?
I think there's an amazing overlap between the two verticals, and it's going to sound probably kind of silly that it's pretty obvious when you take a step back, but it took me a while to see all of the nuances and how these two verticals fit together. But if you look at the foundation of both verticals, where learning is really the focus. So events are about providing learning opportunities. So is e-learning. So if you take it from that standpoint, I think both industries can learn a lot from each other. So from the event side, I think event professionals, event platforms, I think even presenters can learn strategies from the e-learning space. Specifically, I think the events industry can start to look at content consumption in ways beyond just, we call it the sage on the stage, like just having some expert who's presenting on maybe their expertise, obviously, or their case study. But there's other ways to help people consume content, other learning modalities. I was at an event last week where the main presenters were talking about learning styles, which I just want to be very clear, that's been debunked. Learning styles is not a recognized area of education, but it was brought up last week in an event, and I thought, this is really an interesting part where I hope the event industry does not take that on, because it's a marketing tactic in the education space. But I think the movement is going in the right direction in the event space. We're seeing the introduction of some e-learning features like polls, surveys, quizzes, chats, like they're coming into the solutions. And all that is about getting the participants, the attendees, to be actively involved in the discussion or in the content consumption. But there's still more ways that e-learning can produce, I'm going to say, content consumption strategies, technologically, that is. And then the last part is the data conversation. I'm seeing in the event space, a lot of people are starting to talk about data. It's been such a huge focus in the e-learning space. I think the event industry can learn a lot from not just data collection and analysis, but action plans around the data. So I think that's the next big step for what I see in the event space. I think from the e-learning world, there's a ton that we could learn in e-learning from the event space. Specifically, marketing stands out to me as one of the major areas where e-learning has just not done a very good job at. But I see from the event space, it's amazing how much energy and success goes around marketing to really funnel people towards the event that you obviously have a business requirement. You have business requirements that need to be met. So I think that's a big part of it. Networking is another big thing that events do way better than e-learning. And I think when you start to look at user-generated content and you have a whole lot of expertise within the attendee group, e-learning does not leverage that knowledge and insight and expertise as much as the event space. I think networking is has a big leg up in the event space. And then lastly, just the wow factor around events. I mean, you bring in keynotes, there's an experience that as an attendee, you're looking forward to. And I think e-learning is missing some of those emotional elements that events are doing a really good job. So But I think both industries have a lot of synergies, and I think they should be looking at each other in terms of leveraging the benefits, either feature-wise or strategy, and bringing them into the other vertical.
Interesting. Just as a side note, you mentioned, debunking, myth. And I think this is going to be very important in when it comes to event psychology. And this is what I'm talking about and, advocating in the event space. I think we are seeing more and more discussions around applying behavioral science and psychology in events. And so people start talking about it. And just a word of caution, like you said, we need to double check all those claims about how brains work, about human behavior and mind, because there are a lot of myths that are debunked by scientists already, but they're still circulating in the space, right? And people are drawn by those shiny statements like, there are learning styles or there is lizard brain, but we need to be careful about it and listen to, to the experts and to the scientists and researchers on this. And so I also noticed that you mentioned active participation. And I believe that this is one of the signs or one of the aspects of engagement. How do you define engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think engagement has been loosely applied and spoken about in the event industry, same in e-learning, without it kind of really being defined or identified as what are the characteristics that you're looking for. And so I look at engagement as really a mix or a combination of motivation and emotion. So both of those are, I would say, addressed in different ways. So on the emotion side, that I define more in terms of passive engagement. So the environment that the people are in, the content, the quality of content, the delivering of that content. So how the speakers are in terms of their performance, in terms of setting the stage for people to, I always look at it as like, are they leaning in? Like I visualize someone who's emotionally or passively engaged. They're leaning towards their computer because they're wanting to soak up more. Whereas someone who's not is, not passively engaged is someone who's got 30 tabs open on their browser or, is, on their phone and multitasking. So there's a lot of things that go along with improving the quality of passive engagement. It's not an area of our expertise. So it's a critical part of the event experience, but just not something that I would say we have a background in. On the motivation side of things, that's where I look at active engagement. And that's really where we are really interested in getting people to actively be involved in the event, taking actions at the event that will not only improve their experience because they'll get more out of the event as they engage with it more, but it will also satisfy other stakeholders' business objectives. So we're going to see improved ROI from not just the attendee, but from all of the stakeholders. So that includes the event professionals, that includes the client, that includes the speakers, the exhibitors and sponsors. So all of the stakeholders should benefit if we get the attendees to take more of these actions.
Mm-hmm. And so you are saying that motivational design strategy is required to drive engagement. Can you talk more about that? What is motivational design? For
sure. So the motivational design is really speaking to what I was just talking about in terms of the active engagement and getting the attendees. I like to think of the word nudge. I want to nudge the attendees to take more actions than they say normally would without having these tools and strategies there, with the goal of improving the ROI, as I said, of all of the stakeholders. And specifically, we look at the timeframes around an event as well. So, for example, we want to look at what actions do we want attendees to take in the pre-event timeframe. So around say registrations. So how is it that we can drive people to register an event in a timely manner? So that's one. And how do we get the most number of attendees to register? And then, of course, there's the check-in part, which is kind of leading up to the actual event itself. In the event is another time frame that we're really interested in. So how do we get people to attend, obviously, the most number of sessions? How do we get them to do the most networking? How do we get them to book meetings with exhibitors and sponsors? So the actions that, again, in the event itself will improve the attendees experience, but also improve the other stakeholders experience as well. And the same with post-event are there ways that we can get people to engage with the content and take actions once the event is over. So we're really interested in stretching the duration of time of engagement around an event and looking at the systems in each of those different phases and how can we optimize those behaviors in each of those parts. And then lastly is we're looking at events as being just one component of a larger community. And I know communities is another buzzword that's getting thrown around a lot in the event space, but again, defining what is a community. And that's where we're interested in getting people to take actions in other platforms that are connected, which build a community. So for example, I see e-learning as being a big part of a community as well as an event. So people might transition from a learning environment to an event environment. And then once the event is over, they might go back into that e-learning environment. But we can also feed in systems like e-commerce and marketing and sales. So all of these other integrations that we want to drive behavior change in, we feel like that's what a true community is when we build a larger digital ecosystem where we get people to take actions to drive ROI and business metrics that are really a longer term engagement solution. So we keep people around for the longest periods of time, including attendees, including sponsors and exhibitors, all of the stakeholders that we're interested in providing that experience and service for.
And it's interesting. I think it's important to highlight that it's not only about attendees, right? It's about all involved, all parties involved in the event.
And that's the critical part of it is designing the timeframes, the specific behaviors that you're trying to shape during those timeframes, identifying the stakeholders that you're really trying to benefit, and it might be different focuses at different timeframes. Like in the registration side of things, the pre-event, I should say, that there's a really heavy focus on the registrations, because if you think about the knockoffs of that, well, if you don't get enough registrations just based on revenues for that alone, obviously there's problems in your business model there. But it also impacts then the number and the quality of exhibitor and sponsor that wants to get involved. So there's knockoffs that we start to look at, business metrics that we start to see as an impact, and that's why we focus around those actions at specific timeframes. But the other part is looking at motivational design. There's other products that do it really well, and so that's kind of where I think if you kind of watch the products that you use outside of events, like just in daily life, there's a lot of really interesting motivational design strategies and other products. And one in particular, I'm learning another language right now. So I'm using Duolingo, which I'm obviously interested in gamification. So that platform has done it really well. But they do all sorts of interesting motivational design strategies. So for example, I earn gems for completing my lessons of Duolingo. And just the other night, it said, do you want to earn 18 more gems to watch this advertisement? I was like, oh, this is so interesting on a motivational design strategy, because watching an ad has nothing to do with me learning my language, but it has everything to do with driving value towards that sponsor who's obviously paying to have their ad there. But what's interesting is the ads that they're serving me are ones that I'm also interested in. So I'm an outdoor enthusiast, and so I'm getting ads for apps that improve my ability to go find trails for mountain biking. So the whole system is designed to, okay, I'm learning a language, but hold on a second here. We also have this other need to serve this advertisement. And I would never, now of course I'm saying, yes, I want to watch these ads because I want my gems, but it's interesting. I'm getting fed ads that are actually meaningful to me. And now I'm actually using some of those products as well. So it's an added benefit. There's a benefit across multiple stakeholders here. So from learning a language, I'm now actually improving my trail finding in my mountain biking, my personal hobby. So that's the kind of connection that I like to see, people think about when they're looking at motivational design, because it's in other products. We haven't really seen it, I don't think, in the event space.
That's really interesting. And I think it also, if we think about it further, like it is also about suggesting something that would be meaningful to the audience, right? It's not just a random sponsor that has nothing to do with, whatever you are trying to achieve or with what your interests are, right? It should be meaningful to you.
Absolutely. And I think that's where platforms now are taking this big step into AI. And, there's obviously the arguments against the whole data privacy and collection and how much they know about me. But from a user experience, I have to say that I'm very pleasantly surprised with how well I've been targeted, that this is clearly meeting my interests. So the value is there. And I think that that's where the next steps will be, especially as we collect more information about people, whether it's, intentionally or not. I think there's obviously a whole nother discussion there, but a lot of event platforms, the amount of information that they're collecting from you on registration and your profile, things like that, if they can use that in a way to serve you a more meaningful experience, that obviously there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, that's the whole new topic of personalization that I would love to discuss as well. But going back to motivational design and gamification, right? What issues do you see with event gamification at the moment?
First of all, the name itself, the word gamification, I think has just been butchered from the event space. I think it's added confusion to the market. I actually blogged about it a couple of weeks ago because I'm seeing the term gamification being blanketed across the industry and used in many different ways. And it's important to know the difference between them. So if you're looking for this solution, you're clear on what is it that you're going to get when you're searching for the term gamification. So the term itself is adding game mechanics to non-game contexts. And typically it's being added points, badges, and leaderboards. Like in e-learning, we do that, but you can do it in the event space. Where I see the confusion is that there's a lot of third-party integrations that use the word gamification, but they're actually introducing games. Like it's spin the wheel or whack-a-mole or Jeopardy or trivia. Like they're actually games themselves that are often sponsored. And fair enough, there's a total value there and there's a reason behind using those, but it's not gamification. It's adding, I would say, certainly an entertainment flavor to the event that has sponsored content, but it's not designed to do behavior change where we look at typically for gamification. And even gamification itself kind of has two main branches. There's structural gamification and there's content gamification. And those are used differently as well. We come at it from the structural point of view, again, looking at the behavior change and encouraging people to take action. And the problems I typically see with those systems are what I call reward fatigue and indifference. People just get tired of earning the same things or they just don't care about it. And that kind of stems from a lack of autonomy. People in these systems, they don't have any say in what's happening. Like they just passively get points or badges and there's no way for them to influence the system. So I feel like it becomes very I guess you'd say systematic and predictable in the sense that there's no, I just don't get that motivated by being part of those systems. So that's where I think the pressure is on the third-party integrations to really come up with ways to, how do you make it so that people have autonomy, that they can influence the system, that they have a choice in how they're interacting with it. So I think that to me is where gamification needs to move.
Interesting. So there are two things that we need to add, some unpredictability, and at the same time, something that gives people a sense of control.
Absolutely. Yeah, the autonomy is a big one, and you're exactly right. It's another one that I actually forgot to mention was adding elements of uncertainty, and that games of chance are typically incredibly appealing to people, and so adding in that flavor as well is very powerful in terms of driving behavior change.
Yeah. So what are some best practice examples of gamification at events that you've seen?
A couple that come to mind are ones that facilitate team building and networking. And so I was at an event a couple of weeks ago from one of our partners that has introduced an event platform called VII Events that has introduced a team escape room. So you're put onto a team with a handful of people, and each team works together, working themselves out of, it was a lab that had a biohazard, and I think it was I think they was releasing a plague or something like that. And you had to go in and try and stop the release of this as a team. And so we were put into this scenario where we had to work together on figuring out getting out of each room and working our way towards this lab to stop the release of this biohazard. And it was just an interesting way of working with people that I had never met before, obviously, and were just put into the same team, and how it introduced an element of networking that you wouldn't have experienced in any other way especially on a virtual platform. I really like the other idea I really like I've seen is scavenger hunts. So again, you're putting a purpose or a series of challenges. So you're putting in a couple tasks that are kind of bunched together into a small bite-size challenge that doesn't take too long to do, and then is kind of more digestible. Like if you give people just all of these things to do, it becomes a bit overwhelming. So I like the idea of scavenger hunts. It's like, go complete your profile, go speak to one exhibitor or sponsor and network with one other person. So you give them kind of like 3 tasks to do, and it feels like it's very achievable in a small amount of time. So I like that framework where you're putting kind of a fence around what you're asking the attendee to do. And then, of course, our own platform, Incentli, we've introduced the idea of a virtual currency into the event platform where people take actions and they earn a currency and can spend it on an incentive store that's populated by the exhibitors and sponsors. And what I like about that is that I find a lot of exhibitors and sponsors are kind of tucked away on the platform. It's hard for them to get visibility. So with Incentli, it puts them out back in front of the attendees. And as the attendees spend their coins, it acts as a lead capture system. So it's got that strategy of obviously getting people to take action, but it's also giving the exhibitors and sponsors a way to get in front of the audience.
Right. And I like how it kind of extends this connection post-event, because not only they are engaging, with those rewards and coins during the event, but they also have an opportunity to come back and have this connection with sponsors after the event, right? When they spend
absolutely
the currency.
Absolutely. And there's a few other parts of it that I like, which is one, it puts a bit more pressure on the exhibitors and sponsors to start thinking about how can we add value to attendees, like pre-COVID, it was, you went to an exhibition hall and you picked up a bunch of swag from these exhibitors and sponsors. And I felt, a lot of the stuff like, flash drives and pens and squishy toys and things like that aren't really that useful. Plus, there's a lot of waste involved in that. So there's a whole other sustainability argument there. But I'm way more interested in sponsors and exhibitors starting to think about how can they add value to the attendees beyond, just the swag giveaways, but how can we help them be better at their jobs or get more out of the event itself on a long-term basis. So, and I think it's just a smart marketing strategy as well. I don't know that there's ever been a business transaction involved by someone, acquiring a backpack from a sponsor and exhibitor like that. What's the business value there? So I think the pressure is on the exhibitors and sponsors to really start getting more creative in how they interact with the attendees themselves. And then, of course, like you're mentioning, how do you get people to get more value from the event post-event? And I think that's another, again, and for the exhibitor and sponsor, how do they get more awareness, and how do they stretch the lead capture time that they have? I think a benefit for, again, both parties.
Yeah, talking about meaningful connection, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So what resources about motivational design, gamification would you recommend?
I think, again, starting with the products that you use in your everyday life, and if you start to look at them, you'll start to see what they're doing to influence your behavior. A popular one in my house is the Fitbit, to how many steps do you have during the day. And it's interesting, just the little celebrations from the screen and giving you that positive feedback about meeting those goals. If you start to think about that, and I ride a exercise bike, I have a Peloton, so there's strategies in there like high fives and leaderboards, things to keep you coming back to using that product. I think it's Duolingo, again, is another one. I think when you start to look at those products and start to think of like, are there ways that we could leverage these strategies in the event space? Like, how could we use some of these same tools in ways to drive behavior change at events? So I think that would be the first one, just kind of the awareness of like the products that you're using and start thinking about how you could use it in the event space. There are a whole bunch of gamification gurus out there that you can listen to. They have books, they have podcasts, they have TED Talks, a number come to mind. UK Chou is well known in the industry. Andrew Machuski, Monica Cornetti is Jay McGonigal is another one. There's a bunch of different perspectives on the industry itself that I think they're all worth listening to because they kind of come at it from different directions. Same with like, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I have a certain, I would say, understanding or approach that I come at the industry with. And so each of those people will have a different flavor of what they think is a good strategy. And then lastly, on our website, on Incentli.com, you can download our Incentli our event gamification booster. So it's really around that motivational design strategy I was talking about and the frameworks that we're using in the event space as well, that you could use like without using our technology. You could use just on a paper-based or on Excel sheets, like you could do the same thing there. So if you're interested in looking at how could you apply that to your own events, then yeah, definitely another place to go.
Okay, that's great. And my final question, which I ask every guest on this podcast, because the title is "What If I Told You?" Can you complete the sentence with any one takeaway relevant to our conversation? What if I told you?
What if I told you that engagement is the chocolate, but ROI for stakeholders is the broccoli? So I like to think of the chocolate broccoli analogy, where people are looking for the chocolate, but what they really need to eat is the broccoli. So when we're looking at engagement, I really think it's important to consider what are the business metrics that are the supporting foundation for are that are the end result of an engaged audience. And there's all those stakeholders that I mentioned. So I think that's where, when we use the word engagement, I always like to connect it to the actual business results that we need to achieve.
Right. I love this metaphor. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a really interesting discussion. I do appreciate, and thank you for your time and for the insights that you shared. I encourage everyone to connect with Jeff on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And I will leave all the links to the blogs and the website in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast, and I invite you to join the Event Psychology Club. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Victoria, for having me. Thanks, everyone.